Hey everyone, Eric Dutram here with the latest edition of the Dutram Report, the podcast on ETFs and more. Today we have with us Andrew Chanin, CEO of Pure Funds. We talk about an interesting and often overlooked area of the investing world, the intersection between healthcare and technology. In particular, we discuss some emerging growth areas of this market, such as informatics, telemedicine, and even cyborgization too. So if you have any questions or comments, make sure to send them in to podcast@zacks.com, and don't forget to find the Dutram Report on iTunes and give us a review there as well. But stay tuned for my chat with Andrew right after this. Okay, Andrew, thanks for joining us. So I wanted to kick things off by discussing what health tech is, what kind of industries go into this field, and how is it different from other areas of either healthcare or technology?
Well, thank you for having me. Yes, so health tech is a really interesting area. And in the U.S. alone, there's about 50-plus healthcare ETFs. Yet there tends to be a big focus when people talk about healthcare that they tend to focus on the biotech, the pharma, the drugs, the vaccines, companies like that. But some of the highly innovative areas occurring in the healthcare space are happening in the health tech side. And for us, the definition of health tech are companies that are either in healthcare informatics, medical instruments, or medical appliances. And these are three areas that just don't tend to be represented really in the world of ETFs that much, and is exactly why we actually brought out a health tech ETF this past August.
So are there any one of those markets that you mentioned especially promising right now? And if so, why do you think that one is in focus?
It's tough to say one being more exciting than the next. However, healthcare informatics I think is one of these really interesting areas where we're starting to hear more about it, but there's not really that much exposure in other ETFs out there. And healthcare informatics is really just kind of a way of saying the transfer of data across the healthcare space. And that can come in many different forms. So, for example, as a cost savings mechanism, it may be cheaper for a hospital or a doctor's office or practice to start automating a lot. Back in the day, my father, who's a physician, has walls and walls of files, and every single thing was paper filing and putting it in. The amount of time and the cost is actually tremendous when looking at the broader healthcare space. So being able to share files, store things like that, hospitals can actually start to see cost savings from implementing some of these technological solutions. On the other side of healthcare informatics, you also have companies that are doing things like implanted devices that are sending real-time signals back to a healthcare provider. We're seeing big data solutions like preventative and predictive analytics. We're seeing kind of us getting a better understanding of how our cells, our anatomy, chemicals, and different compounds, how all these things interact. And the more experimentation we have, the more samples we have, the more data, the more inputs we have, the more that those can help to drive solutions and treatment going forward as well.
So it seems to me that healthcare has been a little bit behind the times when it comes to some of this informatics stuff that you've been talking about. I mean, as you discussed with the files, at least from my personal experience, it seems like they still very reliant on paper for a lot of the information. So why do you think it's taken healthcare so long to adopt these technological processes that we've seen, pretty regularly in a lot of other industries already?
So I think it probably comes from several reasons, but right now we're at this really interesting time where we're seeing this convergence of healthcare and technology. So we now have a lot of these tools and resources which 50 years ago, 20 years ago, really wouldn't have even been possible. But right now we're actually seeing with developments and improvements on various technologies, for instance, nanotechnology, cloud computing, big data analytics, things like this are all helping drive innovation in the health tech space. So, part of it was just because technology wouldn't really allow for it. And now we're really seeing technologies that are allowing for the implementation of some of these tremendous ideas in incorporating healthcare technology into the healthcare field. But another even came from kind of government mandates, where we were looking at things with Obamacare and the different kind of push and pull factors that we saw occurring throughout the industry, where doctors are being forced to move more paperless and storing things and sharing information and whatnot. So, I think the amount of data and how technology is getting smaller and smaller, in these different drives, we're seeing that there are more companies trying to roll out different types of healthcare solutions.
Yeah, so you mentioned politics real quick. Are there any concerns investors should have in this area about the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, that being repealed or replaced? Is that a concern for investors?
I think concerns are probably warranted across the healthcare space and not just necessarily health tech. That being said, the new administration has discussed much more concerns with the pricing on pharma, and this fund has little to no exposure in the drug and vaccine side. So really kind of the big culprit that's been catching headlines are pharma prices being too high, where it hasn't necessarily been as big of a concern with the current administration on the health tech, the informatics, the instruments, and appliance side. Additionally, one of the big talks has been the repeal of the medical device tax, which I believe is about 2.6%, and that actually gets paid directly by the medical device company. So a repeal of the medical device tax would actually have the potential to be beneficial to many of these companies that are on this non-pharma, non-biotech side of the spectrum. So I think that there's kind of this drive to reduce costs and reduce overhead, which technology is making possible. At the same time, we're also seeing that this current administration has desires to maybe speed up the process for the approval of various pharma as well as technologies. So it actually seems like there are some things that could potentially be tailwinds. So to the extent that health tech stays out of the purview as being too expensive and overly prohibitive kind of aspect, and is viewed as a way to maybe provide better care or cheaper care or what have you, I think that there's many things that can be developed regardless of whether there are headwinds or tailwinds to this industry, because we're seeing this kind of renaissance and transformative change within the healthcare space.
Okay, let's switch gears real quick and talk about the fund your company has that tracks this space, the Pure Funds ETFX Health Tech ETF, the symbol IMED. Maybe you could walk us through the selection process. How is it decided what to include and what to exclude? Because to me, it seems like this could be a market where there are several non-pure play options that have plenty of businesses outside the health tech space. Is that the case?
So in this fund, you'll actually notice, if you're familiar with kind of our suite of 8 thematic ETFs, this is actually our fund with the largest amount of holdings in it. This fund, as you said, has a focus on medical appliances, medical instruments, and healthcare informatics. Compared to other healthcare ETFs, this fund actually has a fairly large international component. So not all companies in the U.S., whereas many other healthcare ETFs have a very large focus predominantly in the United States. For this fund, it's roughly 50-50 U.S. versus international. The companies are significantly focused on health tech, if not 100% pure play. So, like you said, certain kind of themes, you might have a large diversified technology company that has some type of facet of its business that is going along that theme. If you look at the holdings here, you'll see a very significant percentage of the revenues being derived from these companies coming specifically from these 3 areas in health tech, which we identify. So this is probably one of our most pure play funds based on the holdings and where they're deriving their revenues. It's also fairly balanced, global, domestically versus international. And there's an equal weight as well component to the companies in this fund. So yes, there may be some of the companies that you're familiar with, like a Medtronics or a Stryker, that are big in the device space or what have you. But at the same time, you also see exposures to companies like Teladoc, which specializes in telemedicine. Many other companies that you might not be familiar with. So you're really getting an interesting representation to companies across the spectrum, from a couple $100 million in market cap to several billion in market cap, coming from around the world, specializing in all these different areas within the broader health tech space.
Yeah, you mentioned Teladoc. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about this idea of telemedicine. What does that mean for the average person out there? And is this going to be a big growth area for the health tech space?
I think that there's certainly benefits and efficiencies that are created by things like telemedicine. This is one of the first pretty much pure play publicly traded companies specializing in telemedicine. The idea here is people have connected devices. More people are using connected devices than ever before, saving individuals the time of having to go out to their doctor's office, maybe expose themselves to other risks in their commute to their doctor's office, maybe contamination at a doctor's office or a hospital, maybe infecting the actual care provider. This is a way that healthcare providers, for certain types of examinations, have the ability to almost kind of enter your home without leaving their office or leaving their own home, and being able to hopefully give a proper diagnosis to their patient. So, it frees up the patient to, significantly more time in their day, and maybe gives them more flexibility with the scheduling, and can maybe actually see more patients and see them at, better times. So, kind of this is just one area, and, as we've seen it growing some popularity, it's tough to say what the biggest drivers to the space, but I think we're seeing just so much in innovation coming that, this is kind of just, I think, a really interesting example of taking one of these things that wasn't really possible before, but taking the technologies that are available and making them usable within the healthcare space.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit more about the international exposure that you mentioned. What are some of the big countries in IMED? And would you think it's fair to say, given how much exposure is international in this fund, that some of the nations out there are, maybe a bit ahead of the U.S. when it comes to this whole technology and medicine trend?
Yeah, so this is a fairly diversified fund outside of the U.S. You have holdings that are coming from Japan, Germany, the U.K., Sweden, Ireland, other places throughout Europe and Asia as well. And it's kind of interesting when looking at an industry such as this. Some countries probably have different focuses because of what they're seeing in their own demographic changes. Certain companies that are dealing with different types of diseases in, let's say, a malaria-infested area, or something where they're trying to help combat Ebola or something like that, or treating people with Ebola, how to do it more more sanitarily. They may have different focuses and needs locally to try to find different types of solutions and technologies. Where somewhere like Japan, you might see this need to work on something because there's such a large aging demographic. I think you do see maybe certain areas may have more companies that are kind of devoted to finding solutions for specific things, but research in genetics in different areas we're seeing from across the board. So I think on a smaller, kind of more regional basis, you may see kind of certain areas emerging or becoming a little bit more prevalent within a specific region or country. But for the most part, it's we're not necessarily saying that Germany is the 3D printed organ capital, and the U.S. is specializing in preventative analytics or cyborgization or things like that. We are seeing a pretty diversified spread of the companies that are in the health tech space and where the innovation is coming from.
And it also looks like there's a pretty diverse holding by market cap. We're looking at about 25% in large caps. So I'm guessing most of the investors out there haven't heard of some of the names in this fund. Do you have any other interesting examples of innovators that are in the index underlying IMED?
I think Alibaba Health is one that many people aren't familiar with. They're more familiar with Alibaba, the company, obviously, but they're doing things with big data and health and predictive and preventative analytics and things like that. Yeah, that's just another example of kind of a foreign company that some people may have never heard of, or might not even be able to get exposure to invest in, even if they wanted to. Kind of more so, less about specific companies, but different types of technologies that are going on. You mentioned, obviously telemedicine, cyborgization, 3D printing, connected implants, virtual reality within medicine, portable radiology solutions and diagnostics, cryogenics, genetic editing, and other areas within genomics. There's just so many really interesting things going on. And for us, because there are so many different companies specializing in these various technologies from around the world, and being that so many of the healthcare funds out there are really focused on biotech and pharma and vaccines, that this was something where we're not saying that you shouldn't be necessarily in a healthcare ETF. What we're saying, though, is if you are in a healthcare ETF, there's a good chance that you're not getting a lot of exposure to the companies that IMED is actually offering, and that's exactly why we brought this ETF out. It wasn't just to have another healthcare ETF. It was to create something truly different that's providing investors with different exposures to some of these absolutely transformative technologies that are emerging around the world.
So how do you see it fitting into investors' portfolio? It sounds like you consider it more of a healthcare fund than a tech fund. Is that fair to say?
No, I think it certainly is both, and it's because of this convergence. But if you look at the companies here, I think that most of them would associate much more on the healthcare side, or maybe they would say we're technology companies with a healthcare focus, maybe. So this is something that could be an interesting complementary piece to individuals that have exposure to other healthcare ETFs, because there is so little overlap with other funds that are out there. So I don't necessarily saying that health tech is a better area to be in than biotech. But what we are saying is, if you are in some of these other funds or individual companies, here's a way to, reduce individual company risk while getting exposure to, some of these companies creating these various technologies and giving them, a way to reduce that individual company risk, maybe even volatility, while having some new exposures in their portfolio that could complement their other healthcare or technology holdings.
Okay, and you did mention a couple times this idea of cyborgization. I mean, I got to ask, what kind of companies are doing work here? Because it kind of sounds like something out of, either Terminator or Skynet. So if you have any good examples of this cyborgization, I think listeners would definitely like to hear a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, they certainly talk about a lot of companies out there that are working on implanted brain chips, things like that. You're talking about the ability to actually provide new appendages for individuals that may have been born without them or maybe have actually lost them through things like accidents or military service. People coming home and being able to, get now, have a pair of legs that can, take them places so they don't have to be relying upon others to help them. I think there's a lot of different ways that we could see this, and it's not necessarily, the Terminator-style cyborgization where you have, robots taking over. However, it is certainly technologies are making leaps and bounds to be able to help people so they can be more productive and self-reliant themselves. So, I think that those are just kind of two examples, but there really is so much. But I think a lot of kind of instant interest and demand is coming from the ability to replace limbs with functioning technology.
Okay. Well, Andrew, thanks for joining us. There were some great insights there on IMED and the emerging health tech space at large, too. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. That was Andrew Channon, the CEO of Pure Funds. You can check out more information regarding their health tech ETF at purefunds.com, while the symbol for the fund is IMED. Well, hope you enjoyed this edition of the Dutram Report, and make sure to tune in for more interviews and discussions on the world of exchange-traded funds in the future. And for my thoughts on the ETF world, make sure to go on over to Zacks.com, check out the ETF Investor Service, which includes my top picks and commentary on the markets. And don't forget to find and review the Dutram Report on iTunes. And if there are any topics you want us to discuss, feel free to reach out at podcast@Zacks.com, my Twitter page @EricDutram, or leave us a comment over on Facebook as well. And be on the lookout for the new edition of the Dutram Report each and every Thursday. But until then, for Zacks.com, I'm Eric Dutram.